I had a dream about Eglon. That's what my friends said to me just in passing. Well, I mean, that's kind of what they said to me in passing. Actually, what my friends said was, I had a dream that just kept coming to me over and over and over last night about, that one guy in the Old Testament, the fat guy that had the sword jammed into his stomach and then that swallowed up the sword. And I was like, Eglon? And she said, yes, I had a dream about him last night. Now, my first question back was, no, wait a minute. You dream an Old Testament narrative? That's amazing to me. I mean, to even just remember your dream is one thing. For it to be something related and not some just absolutely chaotic is another. But for it to be actually Old Testament narrative, that's entertaining. I dreamed of Eglon. Now, some of you might be sitting there going like, I don't really know what you're talking about, you long-haired hippie. Well, in Judges chapter 3, you have the story of Ehud and Eglon. You see, the Israelites were once again in rebellion. They were once again doing evil. They were once again, back into pagan worship. And as a result, God gave them over to Eglon, king of the Moabs. Israel was in charge by the king of the Moabs, and they were subjected to King Eglon for around 18 years of his reign. In verse 15 of Judges chapter 3, it says this, again, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he gave them a deliverer. I find that fascinating. It reminds me a lot of Jesus. That even in the midst of our rebellion, even while we were enemies, or as Romans 5 says, while we were still sinners, God chose to move and act to deliver us. Even while they were in rebellion, yet again, I think that's interesting in verse 15, again the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he gave them a deliverer again. Ehud. Now notice this detail it says in verse 15. A left-handed man, the son of Gera the Benjamite. The Israelites sent him with tribute, with the tax, to Eglon, king of Moab. Now that being left-handed is an important detail, because most soldiers were right-handed. As a matter of fact, there's an entire book on this, that most of the world is right-handed, and the book even argues that left-handed people have a lower life expectancy because they are living in a world that is catered towards someone else. But that's a whole nother issue for a whole nother time. Ehud is one of those rare people. He's left-handed. Now, in the field of battle, if you're using your right hand, you would have your sword strapped to your left thigh, so you could reach over, grab the sword, and pull it out. But if you're left-handed, then you would have it strapped to your right side, so you could reach over and pull it out. So that's the important detail. Verse 16. Now Ehud had made a double-edged sword about a cubit long, about the size of his arm, from his elbow to his fingertips, about a cubit long, which he strapped to his right thigh under his clothing. He's left-handed. He straps it to his right thigh. Now, if you are one of the guards that is in charge of protecting the king, you would make sure that they didn't have any weapons. But if 99% of the people you interact with are right-handed, then you're going to be checking the left thigh, and maybe even the left thigh only. This leaves an opening. Verse 17, Ehud presented the tribute, the tax, to Eglon, king of Moab. And then it throws in another detail, who was a very fat man. That detail is important, not only for our text, but for my friend's dream. But we'll get to that in a minute. After Ehud had presented the tribute, he sent on their way those who had carried it. So you have this big tax, they carry it in, and then once they give it to Eglon, Ehud sends those that were carrying the tax away, and Ehud decides to return back. After Ehud, verse 19, but on reaching the stone images near Gilgal, he himself went back to Eglon and said, Your Majesty, I have a secret message for you. You and I need to talk alone. I have a message just between me and you. Now, he had just been there moments before. He had just given him the tax that was required of him, which probably lowered the guards of both Eglon as well as his men. The king said to his attendants, "Leave us." And they all left. Verse 20. Ehud then approached Eglon while he was sitting alone in the upper room of his palace and said, "I have a message from God for you." As the king rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand to his right side, drew the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. Notice the detail of the text. He plunges it into the king's belly. Verse 22. Even the handle sank in after the blade. Notice the emphasis. Ehud did not pull out the sword, and the fat closed in over it. Now, this is a story in the Old Testament of a judge that brings deliverance to God's people. But I want to make sure that you point out that I point out the way in which the text is emphasizing certain elements. It emphasizes the left hand of Ehud. It emphasizes the sword strapped to the right leg, so that then it sets it up for him to bring deliverance. But once he does, he plunges the sword into the stomach. It says he does not take out the sword. And in matter of fact, it even says that the fat completely closes over the sword. The detail in the text is important because that's what leads to Israel's deliverance from Eglon. But in my friend's dream, she told me, she said, "Shane, I mean, time and time again," she goes, "I would close my eyes, I'd fall asleep, I'd have this story watching the sword get swallowed up in the fat guy's stomach, into Eglon's stomach." She says, "I'd wake up, I'd go back to sleep, and once again it was plunged in." And she said, "And then the Lord said this to me: your vices cover your wounds." She said, after every time that I saw Eglon receive the sword into his stomach, I heard the Lord say, "Your vices cover your wounds." My response to her was, "My goodness, that's profound." It's incredible how often we are able to disguise our wounds and cover our wounds through our vices. And what I found is that each person experiences or has their wounds manifest in their present in their own unique way. Some people choose socially acceptable vices like materialism or workaholism, while others choose less socially acceptable vices like alcoholism or drugs or promiscuity. Whatever the vice may be in your life, one of the things that you must realize is that your vice is merely masking your wound. Your vice is merely masking your wound. This is the reason why I challenge my students, and I challenge our community, and I challenge congregations everywhere I preach: stop covering your wounds. Stop covering your wounds. Share your story. Bring out your wounds. Why? So that you can experience the true liberation only found in Christ. Our vices are covering our wounds, and it's time for us to confess them instead of allowing our wounds to fester under layer after layer after layer of disguise. My challenge for you this week is this: find out what your vices are. Be honest and confess your vices to the Lord. And then ask the Spirit to reveal what wound is being covered up. And then, and only then, can you start to experience the liberation not only from the vice, but from the wound itself. I love you guys. I'll talk to you next week.